And at the end of that hearing, he thanked Mr. Cohen for his testimony, but he said, "Look, when we're dancing with the angels, the question will be asked, what did we do to keep our democracy intact?"
Wow.
And
It brings tears to my eyes.
I want to be in a position to tell my children when they are at an age where it sort of makes sense and they can fully understand it. Yes, this happened. Yes, democracy held in that moment, but this is what I was doing and our family was doing to make sure that this democracy holds for the future that you will have that I may never see.
Let's talk about creating a life and country we're proud of together. I'm your host, Alvina Vasquez. Welcome to Alvina Talks Shift. So here we are, part 2. Thank you all for that cliffhanger. Donald just was describing what happened in Colorado, and what I want to hear. So when these, major shifts happen, it can change the landscape, right? For the future of what our political system looks like. So, Martha, how did you and Donald get connected on this issue? And then what were the steps that you took to get to litigation?
So Donald reached out to me sometime in the spring, and said that he and crew were going to be embarking on this litigation involving Section 3 of the 14th Amendment. And did I want to help? And I wasn't sure at first, but then once I had some time to think about it, I thought, yeah, how can I not be involved in this critically important piece of litigation? And my experience as an election lawyer in Colorado was a thing I think that was useful to bring on board, and so I said yes. And shortly thereafter, I was in Washington, and I met Donald and his colleague Nick Suss in person, and that sort of solidified the deal. And then we began working in earnest to bring on some other lawyers in Colorado who could help with the litigation and locate our petitioners, who are the voters who are the parties in the suit. And then we definitely started thinking about when we were going to file and what kind of evidence we were going to be putting on and how we were going to proceed. So it was pretty exciting. I think Donald's been working on it for a lot longer than me, but I got brought in, I don't know, I think March, maybe something like that.
That's right.
What was the similarities to what happened in New Mexico and to what you were pursuing in Colorado?
Well, one, a lot of the issues overlap. One, most importantly, being whether January 6th and the events surrounding it were an insurrection against the United States Constitution. Um, but I think some other similarities between Mr. Griffin and Mr. Trump are, neither one of them actually engaged in physical violence on January 6th. I think it's important to note that Section 3 was not crafted for the sort of infantry men and women, right? It wasn't built for the followers. It was built to ensure that the leaders of insurrections, the
Oh,
insiders of insurrections, people who didn't fire a shot and didn't have to fire a shot, like Jefferson Davis, and officers, were held accountable for their role in inciting an insurrection against the Constitution by not being allowed to have the keys to government again. And so, there are some interesting factual parallels between Mr. Griffin and Mr. Trump in that regard, because again, Mr. Griffin was not physically violent on January 6th. He mobilized people to come to the Capitol to stop the steal, to stop the certification um, on January 6th, and encourage though did not engage in the violence that occurred on January 6th. And so there's a lot of parallels there. He's not somebody that, entered, stormed the Capitol, as it were. But he was disqualified from office. And I think that's in keeping exactly with what the framers of Section 3 envisioned, which is that, an office holder like Mr. Griffin, who violated his oath by getting other people and encouraging and supporting other people in their effort to storm the Capitol, is consistent with engaging in insurrection under Section 3. And certainly, um, there is no person who's more responsible for inciting the attack on the Capitol than the former president.
So does Section 3 say if you incited, you can't hold office? Or does it say if you are cited if of Section 3, you can't run for office?
So it says that you are disqualified from holding office.
You're disqualified, so you can't run, you can't be on the ballot.
It's the function of most states' election laws, and this is one of the nuances of our case, one of the nuances of Colorado, and why these cases have looked different across the country where other cases have been brought. But um, you know, if you are 32 years old, right, and running for president, won't be 35 by the time you take office. Uh, Most states prevent you from running for office under the thought process that states are given wide latitude to oversee the implementation of or the administration of elections, including elections for federal office, and that it frustrates the public and undermines um, democracy to have disqualified or unqualified candidates on the ballot, and then sort of figure out what to do with it, how to resolve that, between an election that has been decided and when that person would hold office. I mean, this is a silly example, but somebody like Lionel Messi, right? Very popular. Um, not a natural born United States citizen. Maybe lots of people will want to vote for him for president, but uh, that's not allowed in the Constitution. And so, one of the primary functions of Secretary of State offices across the country, but particularly in Colorado, is making sure that the candidates who are on the ballot are qualified or not disqualified to hold the office in which that they are seeking, and just in the same way that we understand why Lionel Messi can't run for president, we understand why former President Obama, who I imagine is quite popular, and George W. Bush, who is popular in some circles, can't run for president because of the 22nd Amendment. Section 3 says that former President Trump, who engaged in an insurrection against the Constitution after taking an oath to support the Constitution, cannot hold the office of president and thus cannot be a candidate. And is currently disqualified from holding the office and cannot be a candidate.
So that was your argument to the Colorado courts.
Yes, that was our argument to the Colorado courts.
So why is it a state by state? How come this can't go to uh this federal courts?
That sounds like a Martha question as our expert in election law.
Well, it's a state question here in Colorado because our law specifically has a provision to challenge the qualifications of a presidential primary candidate. Um, some state laws do not have such a provision, but are very clear that there is a specific process to challenge the qualifications or the eligibility of a presidential primary candidate, and we followed that process. And the state district court followed that process as well. And now we will be appearing before the Colorado Supreme Court, which is also part of that process. It's a direct appeal from the district court to the state Supreme Court, where they will now weigh in on the the district court's opinion and the issues that each side has brought before them. So that's why it's different, because other states don't have that vehicle.
So, say in Colorado, he's disqualified from the ballot, but that's only in Colorado, and he can still run in Kentucky or Alabama or wherever.
He could, but the likely outcome here is that the United States Supreme Court will need to weigh in as to whether or not he has been disqualified under the 14th Amendment. And if the US Supreme Court makes that determination, then he will be disqualified on from every state's ballot.
Oh, okay, so if he's disqualified from the Colorado ballot, then that kinda sets precedent for what that election would be and whether he's if he's not qualified in Colorado for the ballot. Because then the question is that even a fair election then? Because different ballots have different things for federal office for president, right?
I mean, I think the thing that gets lost here is that, ballot challenges happen
Yeah.
every state, every election. It's fairly routine process. I think the only thing that is really different here is that the former president is a popular leading candidate for the office. But these challenges are adjudicated, without much incident all the time. I think that is why, if the former president is removed from the ballot in Colorado, we'd expect that that question would get appealed to the United States Supreme Court, and the United States
Oh,
Supreme
right.
Court would address it. And their decision would be binding on all 50 states. So in some ways, yes, there is the potential for different outcomes across the country, but it's not really a legitimate concern, because that's why the Supreme Court exists. And if that question gets brought to them, they are likely to answer it, and their answer will be binding on all of the other states. And so, there isn't the sort of there isn't really this sort of risk of like different standards in
Got
different
it.
states applying.
And which is interesting because with the makeup of the Supreme Court, it's kind of a mixed bag on election laws, right? They've been good on some things, not great on others. Um, so there's really no anticipating what could happen.
I think that's right. I think that's right.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's right, and I don't think we take anything for granted, right,
No.
at any stage. But also, I think as some of the more recent scholarship, as this issue has become more popular, has demonstrated, is that there are strong sort of conservative originalist arguments in favor of Section 3 applying to former President Trump and disqualifying him from office. And so, we believe that the case is clear on its legal merits, and that there, to the extent that there are ideological differences on the high court, there are strong originalist arguments that we believe would appeal to the originalist bend on the court, that support our client's position.
Are there other cases like this happening in other states?
There are. There's no other state that has conducted an evidentiary hearing like our state has, where there was actual evidence and findings of fact made by the trial court. Other states have had proceedings before courts that were limited to legal argument about whether or not um, Section 3 of the 14th Amendment applies here. So ours is in a very different posture, but yes, there are other cases across the country.
It was no small feat for our clients and this legal team to get to a trial. The former president filed no less than four motions to dismiss. a sort of Hail Mary request for a stay to the Colorado Supreme Court. And we were able to put on a fulsome trial with a 5-day evidentiary hearing with witnesses, including law enforcement officers who defended the Capitol, members of Congress
Wow.
who were in uh, in the building when the Capitol was attacked, experts on uh, political violence and right wing extremists, on presidential powers to quell an insurrection, and arguably one of the only two leading experts in Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, who had written on the subject before January 6th happened and before the topic became cool, if you will. And based on that pretty robust record, Judge Wallace determined that January 6th was an insurrection and that the former president engaged in it.
Interesting. One question that I didn't get to in the last episode, but I want to hear from you. What were you doing when that happened? What were you feeling? Were you watching the news? I mean, I remember driving and hearing a little bit about it, and then I heard, well, it wasn't that many people, and then turning on the news, and it was like a massive amount of people. So, Donald, since you were there in DC, what was going through your mind when this was happening?
I mean, taking a step back, I will say that the attack on the Capitol, I'm sure, is deeply personal for a lot of people.
Yeah.
But it certainly was for me as someone who, has served in government before, and loves democracy, absolutely. But I worked in the Capitol. In fact, I worked in the office immediately adjacent to the tunnel where one of our witnesses, Danny Hodges, was crushed by the
Oh,
mob
wow.
and was the focal point of much of the attack. People tend to forget that Washington D.C. is not just a nation's capital, but it is a community like any other where people live and work. The Capitol is a place where I've taken my children to ride their bikes, right? And
Mhm.
so it was an assault on our democracy, and I think so many Americans felt that. But it felt like a personal affront to have the president of the United States and this mob of insurrectionists, storm the seat of our government, and a focal point of where I have lived and worked for most of my adult life, and attacked it and the people that work within that building, um, to overturn a free and fair election. So there was a great deal of anxiety about like how far the mob would get, where they were staging things like that, but I think anger, like a lot of people felt, that this president and his followers were so had such disdain for our Constitution and our institutions that losing that this is what they decided to do, um, rather than accepting that former President Trump had lost the election.
And Martha, how do you describe what's going on to your children at the time? Because they were what, 14, 15 at the time?
At the time, they were, yeah, 15. Um, I was very upfront with them that this was an assault on our democracy, and that we were facing a moment of peril for our country, and that we all needed to commit ourselves to working to protect our democracy going forward. And I think I've instilled that in them every day since.
It's really interesting as I talk to guests. I'm always interested on how they communicate these things to their family because sometimes the work that we do is so insular that they don't even know how to describe to their friends and family what we do because it's so kind of distant from their day to day of what people actually focus their time on. So it's really interesting to me to hear how you describe to your kids or your family what's happening. And what about your kids, Donald? What was the conversation that you had given this was so close to home?
Well, my kids, thankfully, are too too young to really have any sense of what was going on. You know, I will say though, with my kids in mind, um, and also, I worked for Elijah Cummings for 4.5 years in the House, and I don't know if you remember this from the hearing that he presided over with Michael Cohen, but this was in 2019, which is also the year he died, and I think he was very cognizant of his mortality. And at the end of that hearing, he thanked Mr. Cohen for his testimony, but he said, "Look, when we're dancing with the angels, the question will be asked, what did we do to keep our democracy intact?"
Wow.
And
Like, brings tears to my eyes.
I want to be in a position to tell my children when they are at an age where it sort of makes sense and they can fully understand it. Yes, this happened. Yes, democracy held in that moment, but this is what I was doing and our family was doing to make sure that this democracy holds for the future that you will have that I may never see, right? And I think that that is what drives me. I think that is what drives our extraordinary plaintiffs. And I think that's what drives the folks on this extraordinary legal team that represents them. And that's the pitch that I made to Martha in March. And Martha, more than really anybody else, helped us to build this legal team in Colorado to represent our brave plaintiffs in this historic case. And I'll be eternally grateful to her for that.
Oh my god, were you crying? Because 'Cause I'm crying now just hearing you 2 talk about that.
You know, my team, Martha has seen me cry
Yeah.
a couple of times. I,
It's emotional.
as I said before, I think it is emotional. I think, you know, I am inspired by our clients, right? They are risking far more than anyone else has or should have to. Um, and so, our job is to do a good job for them, in addition to do a good job for, the future of our democracy, for our children, and for everybody else.
And I wanna underscore how they really do put their lives on the line because in today's world, very bad, tragic things, are happen easily, and folks are targeted, and we have the internet where people can get doxxed and their information can be shared, so for them to put their name on the line, um, and present this case is a huge risk to them personally or to their family. It's not a nothing. Just because this is a ballot challenge, which you said happens a lot, this is a very high stakes ballot challenge because people's lives are on the line, literally.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, before we go, let's do a quick wrap up. What is the next steps? What is the work that you're gonna do now, and what's coming in the next couple months?
Well, I guess by the time this airs, we will have had our argument before the Colorado Supreme Court, which happens on December 6th, and we will be close to or have gotten a decision from them, and we'll have some choices to make, or former President Trump will have some choices to make about whether the case gets appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. But we are fully committed to see this through to make sure that our clients' rights and the Constitution of the United States are vindicated. And so, it'll be interesting to listen to this, when it airs,
In a
because I
week.
think things are changing day to day, week to week, and so it could be a very different world by then.
Yep, agreed.
Well, thank you both for joining me today. I really appreciate you just being so open and sharing your personal experiences because I think it gets forgotten sometimes when these big things happen and we talk about the issues, but we rarely talk about like carrying that trauma and holding that for other people so that you're defending our democracy. So I want to thank you for all your work. And thanks to everybody listening. And we hope to get you guys back and have some good news on the next steps of the case. Thank you so much.
Would love to do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for watching Alvina Talks Shift. Please like, share, and subscribe. And as always, engage, empower, evolve. If you liked this episode, or if you want more content like this, go to alvinatalkshift.com or wherever you listen to podcasts.